Hey everyone, it's Mostly Casual Commander. I'm BK. Be sure to follow us on Instagram and check out our Discord. This is a Commander Masters game, and Kyle's playing Anikthea, an Abzan Enchantress deck looking to fill up his bin and reanimate stuff into copy zombies. I'm playing Zhulodok, Void Gorger. I'm going to cast super big, dumb, colorless spells after ramping all day long. Chris is playing Jeskai, Super Friends with Commodore Guff at the helm. He's looking to take advantage of his Planeswalker abilities. And we have Matt playing Sliver Gravemother. This is Sliver Tribal that doesn't mind a board wipe or two thanks to its Encore ability. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and stick around for an appearance from my fat cat Meatball. He's so chunky. Kyle started with a tapped fortified village and passed to me. I played a Wastes into a Soul Ring, exactly what I want to see on turn 1. Over to Chris, he played Frost Boil's Snarl as his land, passing back to Matt, and he plays the World Tree, before passing back to Kyle. On turn 2, he drops a Plains, and then he casts Jeskai Naturalist, reducing the cost of his enchantment spells and a lifelinking 2/2. He passes the turn back over to me. I play Urza's Mine as my land for turn, before casting a Wayfarer's Bubble. And I pass the turn back over to Chris. He draws and plays Mystic Gate as his land, and then he casts an Azorius Signet, getting some additional ramp action on his side of the board. He passes the turn over to Matt. After he draws, he drops Aziator's Proving Ground, tapped, unfortunately. No turn 2 play. He passed to Kyle, who hops right into the red zone and swings a 2/2 lifelinker at me. I take my beats. Kyle gained a bit of life, and on his second main phase, he plays a Forest and casts Satyr Enchanter, hoping to draw some additional cards when he casts enchantment spells. He passes the turn back over to me, and on his end step, I flash in Liberator, Urza's Battlethopter. So now my colorless things have flash. I draw and play an Eldrazi Temple as my land for turn, and I pass because I have flash. Chris plays Port Town, revealing an island, so it'll enter the battlefield untapped. He uses that to cast his commander, Commodore Guff. So now he can start making 1/1 Wizard Dorks and drawing cards and dealing some damage. So he activates it, making said Wizard Dork, before passing the turn over to Matt. On his turn 3, he plays another tapped land, unfortunately, a Rafine's Tower, but he does have a 2-drop in the form of a Venom Sliver, so it's a 1/1 with Death Touch that gives all other Slivers Death Touch. Watch out! On Kyle's turn, he played a Swamp as his land before casting Archon of Sun's Grace. So now when he casts enchantments, he'll get some Pegasuses as well. He moves into combat. He swings both of his eligible creatures at Commodore Guff. Chris uses the Wizard Dork to chump 1, and Kyle gains 2 life before passing over to me. On his end step, I flash in my commander, Zhulodok, Void Gorger, thanks to Liberator. On the cast, Liberator gets a +1 counter, and then on my turn proper, I play a Waste, and then attack Kyle with my Commander. He just takes the beats, dropping down to 37, and I pass happy as a clam because I could flash stuff in. On Chris's turn, he plays an Island, and then he activates his commander, getting another 1/1 Wizard Dork. Then he casts Boros Signet, getting more ramp action on as well. He casts Tezzeret's Gambit as a follow-up play, taking 2 life for the Phyrexian mana cost. So he'll draw 2 cards, and then he'll proliferate. He throws another loyalty counter onto Commander Guff, while I try to convince him to give me a +1 counter on Liberator, but he doesn't bite. He passes the turn back over to Matt, who plays a Forest, and then he casts Hibernation Sliver. So now all of his slivers are bounceable at the cost of 2 life. He accidentally mistapped here, but it impacts the game in no way, shape, or form. He moves into combat, swinging a 1/1 Death Toucher at me. I take it. He passes to Kyle, who casts his commander, Anikthea, Hand of Erebos. He gets a Pegasus, thanks to Archon of Sun's Grace, as well as a card draw. Then he moves into combat, swinging at Commander Guff and myself in the air. Again, Chris chumps to save his commander, and then I take a little bit of damage while Kyle gains some life, thanks to Archon of Sun's Grace. As a follow-up, he drops a Command Tower as his land for turn, and on his end step, I flash in Dreamstone Hedron. This triggers Liberator to get another +1 counter. Once Dreamstone resolves, I'll tap it for mana in order to activate my Wayfarer's Bubble and grab a Wastes, entering the battlefield tapped, and then onto my turn proper. I play a Command Beacon as my land for turn. After that, I suspend a Soul Talisman. Can you believe it? I forgot that card existed until I was upgrading this deck. So that gets suspended with 3 time counters on it, and I cast Forsaken Monument. So now my lands tap for more, and my creatures get a bonus. I move into combat again at Kyle, because he's representing the biggest threat. He tries to Path to Exile my commander, and I have a response in the form of a Not of This World, casted for free, because the card says it's free, because Kyle targeted my commander with the Path to Exile, and its power is greater than 7. So I Cascade. I find a Liquimetal Torque, and cast that bad boy. That'll have me gain 2 life, thanks to Forsaken Monument. I also found a Disappointing Warping Whale, but I'll turn that into an Eldrazi Scion, again, gaining 2 points of life. Kyle realizes his removal failed, and he decides to block with his Pegasus, so he'll gain 2 life, because it's got lifelink. Then I pass the turn over to Chris, who activates his commander, getting another 1/1 Wizard Dork. Then he drops Fury Calm Snarl as his land before casting Jace Mirror Mage. Jace was kicked, so a copy of Jace Mirror Mage enters the battlefield, but this one only has 1 loyalty counter on it to start. He activates that, scrying 2, putting them both on top. He activates proper Jace, again scrying and keeping them on top. He moves to end step. Guff triggers, and Matt cycles a Scattered Grove. Then, on to Matt's turn, he plays Sky Shroud Claim as his first course of action, so he'll find a Zagoth Triumph in that beautiful showcase artwork, as well as a Jetmir's Garden in the also beautiful but not showcase artwork. Then he attacks me unprovoked again for no reason, and that thing's got Death Touch, so I just take it. Then, on Kyle's turn, he plays Shigeki Jukai Visionary. This will trigger his Archon, getting another 2/2, as well as Satyr Enchanter, getting a card draw. Then he casts Battle for Bredegard, again getting a card draw off a Satyr Enchanter and another Pegasus. When that Saga ETBs, he'll throw a lore counter on it and get a 1/1 Human Warrior. He moves into combat, again putting pressure on Commodore Guff and chipping away at Matt with evasive creatures. So Matt drops to 33, Chris loses a Mana Dork, and Guff lost a couple loyalty counters. He passes back to me, and my first action is to crack my Dreamstone, allowing me to draw 3, and I'm hoping that it's all gas. One of them was a Wastes, so that's cool. Then I cast Cauldra Complete, which is pretty good. This triggers my commander on the stack, so Cascade, Cascade, and I gain a few points of life thanks to Forsaken Monument. I cascade into an unstable Obelisk, gaining 2 life, as well as a Gilded Lotus, having to skip over that Mirror Battlesphere. I represented another +1 counter on Liberator, but that's actually not true. I correct that in just a moment. I equip my commander with Cauldra Complete and smash into Kyle. Again, I'm assessing him as the biggest threat. He tries to stem some of the bleeding and puts his tokens in front of my commander. He still takes a ton of damage due to trample, and because Cauldra Complete gives my commander first strike, he does not gain any life. I pass the turn back over to Chris. His first course of action is to activate Guff, yet again getting another 1/1 wizard. Then he drops Myriad Landscape as his land for turn. As a follow-up, he plays Chandra, Hope's Beacon. So he can start copying some stuff, adding mana, impulse drawing, or dealing some damage. He then activates his not Jace to scry 2 to the top. Same thing, but with his proper Jace. Then he activates Chandra, getting manas in order to cast Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. This thing's great. He decides to +1 Teferi, drawing a card, and then he'll untap 2 lands on his end step. Admittedly, he does that a little bit late, but he does eventually do it. He activated his Commodore Guff, drawing cards and dealing us damage as well. Then on his end step, he adds a counter to Teferi. On Matt's turn, he plays Canopy Vista as his land before casting Herald's Horn. I'm assuming that he's naming Sliver as the creature type. Then he casts Crypt Sliver. So now all of his slivers have regenerate target sliver. Nice. He moves into combat again at me for no good reason. Because it has Death Touch, I just take it. On his end step, Kyle flashes in Omen of the Sun. This thing will net him a card draw, a Pegasus, and 2 1/1s as well. Pretty good. So he puts those tokens out onto the board, untaps, and takes his turn proper. He draws, and then his Battle for Bredegard gets him an elf. He casts Felidar Retreat as a follow-up. His engine is churning pretty nicely, so this will again get him a card draw as well as a Pegasus. Then he drops a Plains as his land for turn, decides to give a +1 counter to all of his creatures. Then he bounces his Shigeki back to his hand. This will have him reveal the top 4 cards of his library and put a land from among them onto the battlefield tapped. He found a Sandsteep Citadel. This will then trigger his Felidar Retreat, getting another +1 counter on each one of his things. So he's powering up quite quickly. He moves into combat. Anikthea will trigger on attack, and he brought a Grasp of Fate back from the graveyard onto the battlefield as a 3/3 copy zombie. Because of that, Archon of Sun's Grace triggered, getting him a Pegasus before we all lose 1 thing each. My commander, Chris's not Jace, and Matt's Herald's Horn. We clean up combat damage. Teferi and Guff die. Also, you may notice I've used an overlay to represent some of Kyle's Pegasus tokens because we ran out in the game. I play Labyrinth of Skophos on my turn. Afterwards, I activate my Unstable Obelisk, and I use it to blow up the copy zombie of Grasp of Fate. And even though I returned Zhulodok to the command zone when it was brought into the battlefield, I still get my commander back, thanks to the wording of the card. Matt also gets his Herald's Horn back, which is okay. I cast Ugin's Mastery, so hopefully this will allow me to start manifesting some things. I also gain some life thanks to Forsaken Monument. I play Mannequin, triggering both Monument as well as Ugin's Mastery. So I get a card that's manifested, and then I equipped my commander with Cauldra Complete once again, before moving into combat. I swing Liberator at Chris and my commander once again at Kyle, and because I attacked with big dudes, Ugin's Mastery says flip over that Ulamog's Crusher, then Kyle decides what to do.
Block it with everything.
So he blocks with all of his untapped things, they all die, as well as the elf that he takes off the board in just a second. I pass a turn and Chris plays Interplanar Beacon. Then he activates Jace, scrying 2, keeping them once again on top of his library. He recasts his commander, Commodore Guff, gaining 1 life thanks to Interplanar Beacon as well. Then he activates Guff, getting that 1/1. Those mana dorks have been blocking for days. He activates Chandra and gets mana in order to cast Mila, Crafty Companion. So now when his things are targeted, he draws cards. He casts Thrumming Bird, so he's going to try to proliferate with that bad boy. He moves to his end step, his commander triggers, and he puts another counter on Chandra. And on his end step, Matt cycles Sheltered Thicket. Then on Matt's upkeep, Herald's Horn will trigger, but doesn't him no good. He plays an island into an Arcane Signet, and afterwards he plays Chromatic Orrery, so now his mana is all better mana.
Oh, I forgot to tap you, I'm sorry.
Matt plays his commander, Sliver Gravemother, and with her out, he has an insurance policy against a board wipe. He moves into combat, attacking me like a Rudy McBooty, and I just take all of it because I want to keep all my stuff. He passes, and on Kyle's turn, his Saga will trigger after he draws a card. This says, make a copy of all of the tokens that you already have. So he gets a Pegasus, as well as a 1/1. He drops a Swamp Drop, triggering Felidar Retreat, getting a +1 counter on all of his stuff. Then he casts Demon of Fate's Design, getting another Pegasus token as well. Then he casts Battle at the Hell Vault. Again, another Pegasus hits his board, and he gets to exile a thing from each one of us. So he decides to exile our commanders, all 3 of them heading back to the command zone. Then he casts Shigeki, Jeskai Visionary, getting yet another Pegasus. Then Kyle decides that combat is in order. He moves into attacks, and his commander triggers, getting him an abundance back out onto the battlefield from his graveyard in the form of a 3/3 copy zombie token. And he is presenting lethal towards Matt, so as a cheeky response, Matt decides to bounce all of his slivers back to his hand at the cost of 2 life each. We resolve combat damage, and Matt is knocked out of the game. Sorry, Matt. On my turn, I cast Endless Atlas, gaining 2 life because of Monument. Then I activate it and find an Eye of Ugin. That's pretty exciting. I recast my commander, and this allows me to not only manifest the top card of my library, but also gain 2 life, once again thanks to Monument. Forsaken Monument plus an Eye of Ugin is setting me up pretty darn nicely just to have tons of mana. Using some of that mana, I re-equip my commander with Cauldron Complete, and then I go attacking, swinging my commander at Kyle once again with Crusher and Liberator heading at Chris. He takes his beats, Kyle decides to block with as many things as possible to keep him alive. In my second main phase, I cast Kozilek the Great Distortion, so I'll Cascade, get a 1/1 counter on Liberator, manifest the top card of my library, and gain 2 life, not necessarily in that order. When I Cascade, I find a Thran Dynamo, follow that up with a Geode Golem as well. That will trigger my Ugin's Mastery, getting me another manifested token, and each of those spells gain me 2 life. And let's not forget that casting Kozilek drew me back up to 7 cards. I pass the turn to Chris, and he plays an island, and then he casts Elspeth, Sun's Champion. Afterwards, he'll activate Jace, and he'll scry the top 2 cards of his library, both of them going to the bottom this time. He then activates Elspeth and nukes everything with power 4 or greater on the board. So Kyle and I lose most of our creatures. Kyle cleans up his board in just a second. Thankfully, I get to keep my mannequin, my commander, and a scion. Chris activated Chandra's +1, hoping to be able to cast an instant or sorcery until his next turn. Unfortunately, he whiffs. He passes the turn to Kyle. Battle at the Hell Vault triggers after he draws, so he'll exile my Cauldron Complete as well as Chandra. This will trigger Mila, and Chris will get the draw card. Then Kyle will cast Kodama's Reach. He'll search his library for 2 forests, one hitting this board tapped and triggering his Felidar Retreat, and one going to his hand. He made a 2/2 Cat Beast, then he casts Font of Fertility. With that out onto the battlefield, he'll be able to sack it, which he does now, to go find another land. And he searches his library, finding a forest, hitting his battlefield tapped, triggering Felidar Retreat once again, getting another 2/2 Cat Beast. Then he bounces Shigeki back to his hand, revealing the top 4 cards of his library, finding a land card, in this case Tainted Field, having it enter the battlefield tapped, and getting a 3rd Cat Beast as well. And this guy still hasn't played a land for turn, which he does now, in the form of a forest, again triggering Felidar Retreat, getting him another Cat Beast. I cast Spatial Contortion on his end step, shrinking one of the cats to nothing. Kyle did a good job of cluttering up his board, and I need to declutter it if I'm trying to win. I draw for turn, don't like it, activate Endless Atlas, don't like that. Then I'm like, wait a minute, I have an Eye of Eugene. I'm going to activate that and find a Breaker of Armies for my library. Then I'm going to cast said Breaker of Armies. When I cast it, I'll Cascade, I'll gain 2, and I'll manifest. I find a Skittering Cicada, and when I cast that from exile, again, I gain 2 life, as well as manifest the top. Then I find Titan's Presence with my second Cascade, so I'll gain 2 life, and I get to still pay any additional casting costs with Cascade, so I reveal a Burnished Heart, and that will allow me to exile Chris's Mila with Titan's Presence. And the card that I drew for turn was a Lightning Greaves, which is much better now because I found that Breaker of Armies, and I equip it to Breaker of Armies before moving into the red zone, swinging my Commander and Breaker at Kyle, and my Mannequin and Eldrazi Scion at Elspeth. Chris casts Comeuppance before damage is dealt, so Scion and Mannequin will deal damage to themselves. Elspeth lives. Breaker of Armies forced Kyle to block everything against it, and my Commander gets through, knocking Kyle out of the game. With him knocked out, I get my Cauldron Complete back, and Chris also gets his Chandra back. Then I cast Ornithopter of Paradise, and then Burnished Heart as a follow-up as well. Each one of those gaining me 2 life, as well as manifesting the top card of my library. Then I pass the turn over to Chris, feeling pretty good about my position. He draws and plays a Plains as a land. Then he activates Elspeth, getting 3 1/1s. Next he activates Chandra, floating 2 mana. He'll activate Jace's draw ability, finding an Ajani Steadfast off the top, and this will have Jace lose 4 loyalty counters thanks to Ajani's mana value. Then he casts the Peregrine Dynamo. This can have him copy an ability from a thing that's not his commander so long as it's legendary. And he casts his commander and activates his -3, and then he tries to use Peregrine Dynamo to double the effect. A moment later, we were like, wait a minute, that's not right, but we accidentally leave him tapped, but in no way did that impact the outcome of the game. He'll draw some cards, he'll deal me some damage, and then on his end step, he'll give a counter to Elspeth. On my turn, I untap, draw, and move right into the red zone with everything. Chris has to block all of his creatures against my Breaker of Armies, which makes me the winner. Yay! And here's Meatball. He's so chunky. And there you have it, that's the game. What did you think of these Commander Masters Commander decks? Anyone in particular standing out for you? Let us know what your thoughts are in the comments. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and as always, thank you for watching.